Hi, and welcome to episode number 140 of the Mediatwits. I'm Mark Glazer, executive editor of PBS Media Shift. Today we'll be talking about Billionaires Gone Bad, our media patrons screwing it up, both at the New Republic, where an entire group of editors quit en masse, and at First Look Media, where a site that was to be launched completely went down in flames. What's going wrong at these places, and is there a way to turn them around? Before we get into our discussion, I want to thank our Mediatwits sponsor. Running your own business requires focus, and so does parenting. Mediatwits podcast sponsor NextSpace created a place where parents could give their best quality of attention to both co-working space and childcare space under one roof. Learn more at nextspace.us/nextkids. And I'm usually at NextSpace with my son, but today, due to the rain again here in San Francisco, the NextSpace has been closed, but it is a great place to work and with childcare. So today, before we get into our discussion, I want to introduce our panel. We have Alex Leo from Yahoo, Andrew Lee at American University, David Folkenflik at NPR, Dylan Byers at Politico, and Jefferson Yen, our Mediatwits producer. So first let's talk about the New Republic. It was bought by Chris Hughes, someone nearly a billionaire from Facebook, who bought the magazine. The magazine has always been kind of a really interesting place for thought, not really known for its business model. It's lost millions of dollars over the last probably 10, 20 years, and took over with the idea that it would remain this kind of thoughtful magazine, moving a little bit into digital. But recently, the editor was ousted, and a lot of the staff kind of followed suit. They had a new CEO, Guy Vidra, who came over from Yahoo, and had this idea of creating a vertically integrated digital media company, and that kind of turned a lot of the staff off, and that's why I think they kind of stepped out. David, you talked to Chris Hughes for NPR. What was his response to this kind of mass exodus there, and what did he explain? What he wants to do with New Republic?
Well, it took him a few days to agree to engage. He spoke to me and a couple other folks, and had a piece, fascinatingly, in a very old-line media outlet, the Washington Post, that same morning, this Monday. His argument was that times had to change, that if you looked at places like the New York Times with the Upshot and other innovations in digital storytelling, that was an institution through its media innovation task force and other ways was signaling it wanted to change. He looked at Fox, he looked at The Atlantic, in some ways inhabiting a somewhat similar space to the New Republic, and said, with the Atlantic Wire, which is now more part of Atlantic.com, but nonetheless they changed their metabolism, their identity, that the magazine itself obviously has undergone huge reinvention. If you think of it as a Boston-based magazine with more of an emphasis on letters than it does now have, that institutions can evolve and change. What he wasn't really willing to explain was twofold. Why the break seemed so severe. I spoke to 4 fairly senior former people on the editorial side of the New Republic who have left in recent days because of his not just the firing of Franklin Foer and his replacement by Gabriel Snyder, but of the way in which it was handled. And they said, hey, we were down with streamlining from 20 issues to 10 issues. That was fine. They want us to be more quick twitch. That's great. And in fact, the web allows for longer form as well. They thought that there was the signaling of a contempt by Guy Vidra in particular, and in recent weeks and months, even by Hughes himself. And Hughes wasn't really willing to articulate what it meant. He talked about some of the tools he wanted to be employed more, the videos and charts and visual storytelling, but he wasn't really able to define for me what Vidra meant. And I'm not sure Vidra has so far, even in his memo to readers that came out in the last day or two, really signaled what he has in mind there.
Yeah. And Dylan, what was your take on what went down? What do you think? Was this kind of a tone-deaf move by Chris Hughes? in changing the editorship, and what do you think? What caused the break? Do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, to answer your first question, I think it was incredibly tone deaf, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with recognizing that the New Republic does not have a right to exist just because it's been around for 100 years and has a storied history. I think it's a business, and I think you have to make it a viable business. But you also, there's an expectation when you buy the magazine and you promise to maintain that magazine and maintain its integrity that you're going to do that. Now, because the sort of vision for what TNR is going to be post this shakeup is still very vague. I mean, we don't exactly know what it means to be a vertically integrated media company. I mean, I guess that means breaking down certain walls and certain fiefdoms, but that isn't exactly a vision. I think a better way to have gone about this process would have been to celebrate what is great and what is unique about the New Republic, and saying we want to usher that into a new era in which it can reach more people, it can be more relevant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think they did a very poor job of selling that, not just to the public, but selling that to their own staff, to their editorial leadership. And like David said, it seemed like they were in contempt of the leadership, or that they were dismissive of what that leadership was doing. So, I'm not 100% opposed to change, but I just do think it was handled absolutely terribly, and I think that's why there was such revulsion among the staff, and that's why the majority of the masthead walked out.
Yeah, and Alex, do you want to jump in, because it does seem like maybe there's some problems on both sides, and that there's been critiques of the New Republic as just not really being all that inclusive anyway, and having a very narrow worldview in a way.
So that's an interesting point. This whole thing broke on Twitter, and there was a huge stand being taken by all these editors, and it was the same day that everyone was reacting to the Eric Garner case in New York, which is on the tail of Ferguson. So I think there was a huge kind of tone deafness on the part of the editors in that case. For me, it was like, I can't believe this is the stand you're taking right now when we are having a national crisis about race. And the reaction from Ta-Nehisi Coates about the New Republic and its history of race and its history with race was a reaction that I think was well heard. So I don't think it's just one side of this that has a little tone deafness. I also heard a lot of reaction to it that was like, one of the problems was he wasn't as focused on the magazine. He was focused on content in general, and that was a problem for some people. While they were willing to scale back, that was still a focus. And every place I've worked that's had a print publication, even in this digital era, I hear things like, oh, but is it going to be in the magazine? It's for the magazine, right, not the website, and that for me is a problem. So I still have no idea what a digital vertically integrated company is. Like,
well, you're working at one at Yahoo, right?
Yeah, I work at Yahoo. I worked at Huffington Post. I worked at Newsweek and Reuters. The digital side, I've been in marketing, I've been in product, I've been a journalist, and I have no idea what that means, except that maybe stacking journalists on top of each other would be a funny video. But I don't think the issue. I think the issue is Chris Hughes has probably done a pretty bad job of explaining his vision, and Guy Vidra, if that's the explanation of his vision, that's way more confusing. And then really bringing together teams into one unified vision and saying, we're here to support you. The technology and everything around this is here to support you so you can do great journalism, and it's not here to compete with you or to destroy what you want to do.
Good point. David, did you want to jump in too?
Yeah, you talk a little bit about that Twitter reaction, and there was a fight about, those who say, this is the destruction of a century of tradition. After all, they just celebrated with a huge bash in Washington, attended by former President Clinton, among others, about the outsized role this very small publication has played since its founding, I think, by Willard Straight in 1914, And yet there's a strong backlash of, wow, the New Republic, white since 1914, essentially, very few women in powerful positions, although you can think of some distinguished alumna of the magazine as well, and some very fine writers who have been there even now and until very recently. But there are two things that are worth unpacking, one of which is that, under Marty Peretz, who controlled it for several decades, I mean, it was a a forceful, muscular publication that seemed to veer at times wildly between the liberal side and the center-right, and had this internal conflict. And they were constantly churning young editors out. There were issues, really issues of race. They published the first excerpts of The Bell Curve by Charles Murray that offended a lot of people on the left and a lot of people who had been their readers for years. And they had these terrible fabrication and plagiarism scandals, Ruth Shalit plagiarism, and then Stephen Glass. So you're not talking about a publication that was pristine and never with controversy about direction. On the other hand, you've got this issue about, sustainable business, and I actually agree with Dylan. I think that, Chris Hughes absolutely has the right to say this needs to be supported, as you used to say in High Red, on its own bottom. That is, that it can be self-sustaining. But that is not actually how the New Republic was run for many years. It was run as a way for a guy like Marty Peretz and previous owners to have a place at the table and to be able to put forward, either personally or through their publication, a larger argument at the world at large, even if some of the voices within were at some kind of conflict with one another. And what Chris is saying is that, in a sense, he was saying, I want to be a steward of this 2.5 years ago when he took it over, and that seemed to suggest a degree of largesse. Now he's saying, I want to be a steward of this, and that involves being breaking even, or preferably being in the black, a different conception of stewardship.
If I can jump in on that last point that David was making, I think the question of stewardship, the editorial legacy of the New Republic is certainly a complicated one on all manner of issues. But what the New Republic was a forum for political commentary and intellectual debate, whether or not you agree with it or not, or whether or not it was sometimes sort of dangerous, and certainly there was the issue of plagiarism, etc. But that's what it was. It was a forum for political commentary and debate. And so the question is if you want to start a business and your goal is to have that business be in the black and maybe drive a lot of traffic or get sponsorships or whatever, why buy the New Republic and just change it into something else? Why not just start an entirely new company? Why do you have to take something that's whole raison d'etre is intellectual commentary and debate and then try and change it into a vertically integrated media company?
Yeah. And Andrew, did you want to jump in as well on the point about kind of Chris Hughes, who making the decision to buy the New Republic, and then trying to manage this very complex, very kind of interesting place of thought and commentary, and turn it into a business? It just seems like maybe it's not the right fit, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a surprise to no one who follows this space that kind of the spiritual successor to the New Republic is pretty much what Slate does right now, right? They actually have former staffers of the New Republic who are in significant positions running what Slate does. It's probably the best example of this mythical, vertically integrated digital company where Slate has podcasts of high regard. They touch on all different topics from pop culture to sports to politics and are seen as the best at what they do in those areas. They've got a workable freemium model with their Slate Plus subscriptions. They do live events that draw tons of folks. They have this ecosystem of things being put out in the online edition. The discussion happens in the podcast and has a life beyond the printed or the virtual printed piece. So I think what they do is pretty impressive, and it's one of the few successes you see that can get all those things going in there. So I think DC has shown that it can foster these types of things. If you look at Vox.com, if you look at what Atlantic has done, if you look at what Slate has done. And the best thing that the New Republic folks could do is just to learn from these folks who've done it well in these areas and take the best of those things and add a dash of the Silicon Valley style, but just kind of going with the slash dash and move fast and break things philosophy of a Silicon Valley company just is not the right way to do it.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if Slate is really a huge success. At Graham Holdings, they probably think more about real estate and other things than they do about Slate. And also, is it really a place for this kind of intellectual, dangerous discourse? I mean, it now, it's about like manners, and a lot of other things are really getting attention. I mean, the podcasts are really excellent, but I just wonder whether it's the kind of thing that New Republic was.
And Jeff Bezos didn't want it like that. That's still the only thing that that didn't come with the Washington Post for a reason. I would just say that I think we're talking a lot right now because of these two situations that are happening concurrently about billionaires and patronage. But Mort Zuckerman bought U.S. News and World Report and the Daily News and managed to ruin U.S. News and World Report pre-internet. Like, he wasn't a Silicon Valley billionaire. Like, he was just a normal billionaire with real estate money. So, like, I think that in reality, there is a culture clash that's happening because at this moment, a lot of media companies are having to become tech companies, and this is putting a huge amount of emphasis on this kind of transition and patronage in general, and it's a struggle whether you're owned by a Silicon Valley billionaire or not. But this kind of management and the failure of management and the kind of patronage that we were referencing with Marty Peretz, like, that's been around for a very long time. People wanted a seat at the table, they bought a magazine, and then sometimes they ruined that magazine.
And Dylan, you talked about, why not just start your own publication? And this is what Pierre Omidyar has done with First Look Media, and we heard a lot from the very beginning that this was going to be almost like a utopia for journalists, that they would bring in some really smart, really great independent journalists and just basically just set them free and let them do whatever they want to do and just let them go. What happened there?
Well, the First Look Media example is a great one to bring up because that's its own sort of cluster, what have you. I think that I think there's a mentality in Silicon Valley, and it goes back to all those buzzwords like disrupt and break shit and what have you, that you were around for the formation of a radical change in something, whether it was social networking or delivery systems or communication systems or what have you. And you begin to believe that if you've got all of this money and you have all of this praise for being part of something radical, even if you were just in the right place at the right time, and so you believe that journalism is broken, and you can come in, and if you just pour a lot of money into it, you can fix it. And there's a lot of, I think a lot of the guys who do that are quite naive, and I don't think that's just in the media industry. I mean, I think in other areas, I think in philanthropy, there's a lot of Silicon Valley money that comes in to philanthropy and says, we don't want to do philanthropy the way that philanthropic organizations do it. We just want to do it this way because we're smarter and we can move faster and we don't want to get caught up in this bureaucracy. And the truth is that every industry is different and unique and requires a certain level of institutional knowledge. And it takes work to run a media organization. And it takes work to be the steward of a magazine or to launch a new website. And it just feels to me like a lot of these guys, Chris Hughes, Pierre Omidyar, come in and they don't exactly understand that. Now, take a different example with Jeff Bezos. You have someone who comes in and puts very institutional players in place, right? Marty Barron is the editor of the Washington Post. He is like the penultimate 20th century newsman. They hired Politico's former CEO to come in and run the business. He is like a staple of the Washington establishment. So that is, and the Washington Post, I would say, is having great success. So that is an area where you sort of see that maybe a little bit of like institutional know-how helps you get these things off the ground or keep them running.
Well, Chris Hughes tried that. I mean, he did bring in some people with a lot of knowledge, but after a couple of years, they're all gone now. So, I wonder if the same thing's going to happen. Like, how much patience will Jeff Bezos have? What's your take on it, David, and what's going on at the Washington Post? They did a ton of effort on this new mobile app, and lo and behold, it comes out and it's free on an Amazon Fire for 6 months. So, I mean, is this about kind of propping up Amazon's businesses with the Post?
I mean, I don't think adding the Post is going to, in and of itself, rekindle the fire, as it were, to be the take down the iPad. But I think it's fine. I mean, I think the disappointment would be if Jeff Bezos brought none of his digital know-how or interest in content to bear. I spoke to a friend whose mother was the book review editor of the Milwaukee Journal something like 15 years ago, and at a later point in her career back then. And she said she got a call from this guy from Seattle in the, I guess, mid to late 90s saying, hey, how would you think about it if we were to send you books electronically? Would you read them? And she said, I guess, I don't know. It would have to be really good books. And he says, so it is really about the, like, he was just personally, Jeff Bezos was picking up the phone and calling to do research on this because it interested him. 15 some years later, I want him to bring the third order of insight. The problem for journalists is, the insight can work or it cannot work. And separately, there's some sort of charticle I'm sure Vox is working on right now to illustrate this, but separately, it can be good for journalism or it can be not good for journalism. And those are not necessarily related variables. They may be independent variables. And so you've got a kind of complex formula when you bring in, and disruption can be about breaking the dishes, to use a nicer phrase, or it can be about upending things more gradually. You talk about Slate. My recollection is it took, like a dozen years for Slate to become profitable on its own or more. Chris Hughes was giving a lot of lead time, and something in the last 6 months, according to those who talked to him, changed, and he brought in Guy because of that change to some degree, and then he bought in. He kind of had to decide which half he was going with. If you look at Bezos, Barron, who I think I've said, and I believe that Barron's probably the best newspaper editor in the country right now. I think the Post is clicking on all cylinders, and after several years of which I think people were demoting the Post from the top ranks of newspapers. I think people are seeing it once again in that conversation with the Times and the Journal and other indispensable publications. I think they've really done tremendous work. So Bezos is giving them an incredible runtime, and he's also gently sort of trying to encourage and cultivate innovation without being heavy-handed. And in some ways, that may be the best-case scenario. You see somebody like John Henry in Boston. His cost structure is relatively easy because he bought the paper basically for a song with the Globe, and he seems to be encouraging some very good innovation. And he's a smart guy, although not a media guy himself. So I think these things are possible. It's really about looking about who it is. But the last point I'll make about Omidyar at the moment, if you think about these billionaires, and again, I'm separating out the kinds of billionaires I've covered more extensively, like Murdoch and Bloomberg, who really arose to their billions through information and media. If you think about First Look, the best argument you can make for what's happened there is what they say is, we weren't ready to talk about any of this stuff yet. We were kind of planning on taking a year to figure it out and then start talking about it, and our hand was forced as leaks came out. But I've talked to people who have participated in those discussions, the sort of blue sky conversations, and to my absorption of it, it seems very vague, and it seems as though Omidyar, a very decently intentioned guy in many ways, is sort of taking this journey with his company, trying to figure out who he wants to be and what he wants it to become. And in the meantime, careers are getting jerked around, and Greenwald has a place for himself to break some additional NSA stuff, but otherwise it's not clear to me why we should turn to it or why it should be such a big player.
I also just want to say on that point that, like, it's never been clear to me at first look who the manager was going to be, because, John Cook was going to be the editor when he came on, but Glenn Greenwald is somewhere, he's going to write about the NSA, he's going to write about leaks, but he's not the leader of First Look. And there's this kind of, then Dan Frumkin is there, who's great, but it was never clear to me, like, who was going to form the editorial vision for this place. Like, Glenn doesn't seem to be the type of person who's going to do that. He's more siloed in his vision of what he wants to do. So I think there's a lack of management, and they did discuss, as David just said, taking some time, and then all of a sudden they were launched, and it doesn't seem like they, despite the fact that he flew a bunch of media influencers out to, Hawaii or whatever to have summits about what this should be and could be, it doesn't seem like there was ever a consensus about who was then going to implement it.
Yeah, and they have come up with a lot of different ways of framing what they're doing, including saying this is really up to the journalists to really decide. Like, it's going to be up to Glenn Greenwald what to do. There isn't going to be this kind of hierarchy of editorial and people overseeing everything. It's just like, let them do what they want, and obviously that didn't work in the case of Matt Taibbi. Andrew, you had a comment about kind of the culture clash that's going on when you bring in, I guess it's not just billionaires, but it's the kind of tech billionaires that are coming into media.
Right. I don't think it's necessarily the billionaires, but I think it's the culture that they come from, right? And I think throughout this conversation, I think I've kind of come to the conclusion that it's not necessarily just an engineer and tech person versus journalist, but I think, an analogy that kind of makes sense to me is that if you look at where folks came from, whether it's a Facebook millionaire or an eBay millionaire or an Amazon millionaire, they're used to the software platforms embodying all the decisions and the strategy that this organization has, right? So whether it's eBay as an auction platform or Amazon as an e-commerce platform, and the human beings are the folks who create that platform, but the proof is in the platform. And for news organizations, that's not the case whatsoever. The proof is in the personnel, right? The proof is in the stories. And these folks are not used to managing these types of things. So the imperfect analogy that I had was, it's almost as if the tech folks are used to building a plane where they can control the engine, the flaps, the altitude, anything that the plane can do, you can control. Running a news organization is more like hot air ballooning, right? You don't really have direct control of where the whole thing is going. You can change the altitude, hopefully you'll catch a current, but you really don't have 100% control of everything that's going on, because it really is the conglomerate of all these individuals out there, right? So sometimes you'll hit it out of the park with a Ta-Nehisi Coates piece that resonates throughout the U.S., or sometimes you get it bonehead wrong, like the Virginia rape case. And every single second, every single hour of your news organization is about managing people to create your product. That's not the same as a tech company. So I think that's probably a pretty good illustration of how these cultures are vastly different.
Yeah, I guess except for Richard Branson, he would understand the whole hot air balloon and the airplane metaphor.
Right.
David, did you want to jump in on that point?
Well, I was reminded of something that I learned in preparing for the interview with Chris Hughes and I heard this from more than, I think it was 2 or 3 people at the New Republic who had interacted with him. They said one of the things they found so appealing when he arrived, he's like, look, yes, I'm from Facebook, yes, I'm an investor in Upworthy, yes, all that stuff. He's like, but he's like, remember, guys, I wasn't one of the coders. Chris Hughes was the external communications guy. He was the message guy. And he said, and he conveyed a degree of contempt, at least in that first year and a half at the New Republic, for the Silicon Valley arrogance, as he projected it, and also the Silicon Valley idea that technology solves everything. And he says, I think thought solves things. I think having content, having enmeshed engagement with ideas and debate, that's what people care about. I'm interested in viral, things being viral, and I'm interested in them being interesting. And they were like, my God, this is a guy who speaks our language. He's not, simply a binary, zeros and one guy. He gets us. And at the end, their sense of betrayal was in part because he was siding with somebody who was speaking in that language, however enmeshed Guy Vidra really was in the Valley himself and in the culture of digital transformation himself. And it was kind of a funny irony that they said Chris Hughes was the Facebook almost billionaire, but anti-Facebook in a sense for the notion of just how technology was the point of everything.
Dylan, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, David, I'm glad you brought that up. We've been talking a lot about the business of the New Republic, and I think there's actually a really great personal story here, because you're right. Chris Hughes was sort of supposed to be different. He was supposed to be a good steward of the company and something, or the publication, and something changed, right? Something changed over the last 6 months. Certainly around the time that he brought Guy Vidra in. Some people have noted that was around the same time that his husband lost the race in upstate New York, where he was running for Congress. Certainly Chris had poured a lot of money into that, the same way he had poured a lot of money into the New Republic. And I think one of the great sort of tragedies here is that, Chris Hughes was a communications guy, and he has bungled the communications of this New Republic fiasco immensely. And then B, there's this whole narrative about him being like a guy who loves liberal values, who loves literature, who loves commentary and opinion. It's hard to read an article about this fiasco without someone noting that he reads Balzac in French. And I think that he is probably personally, not to speculate too much, but I think he's personally hates this narrative that he is somehow the Silicon Valley destructor who upended a century-old institution. I truly think that he hates that narrative, and I think he's sort of put his chips down on Guy Vidra instead of Frank Foer and Leon Wieseltier, and I'm sure he's undergoing all sorts of internal conflict because of that.
And Alex, you want to jump in on the platform comment about the kind of technology platform?
Yeah, it feels sort of hollow now after Dylan has given us this beautiful treatise about the meaning of men. Uh, I was going to go back to Andrew's point. I definitely believe that news and especially magazines and thought leadership in this space is about the writers and the content you create. But I think it's impossible at this point to separate from the tools you are given as an editor and a writer to create that content. As someone who's worked in product and as someone who has worked at places with really bad product, it's a major pain point, and it becomes the all-consuming, I can't do what I want to do in terms of storytelling because you have not made these tools available. And I think there's a lot of media companies that struggle with that, and we keep bringing up Vox as this kind of great emblem of creating an identity and having journalism and flowing things and they have an amazing CMS, and they've invested hugely in tech. And there's a lot of companies out there that don't do that. And then the frustration and the product of the journalism suffers as a result of a platform not being in place.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I don't know, you disagreed with me, but I agree with you. I'm not sure how that works, but here in D.C. we had the Online News Association gathering, and Vox.com, based here in D.C., actually described their philosophy and the working process. And if you read a recent piece by Emily Bell of Columbia talking about this exact, New Republic tech versus journalist conundrum, she talks about the same thing of hybridizing the journalist and toolmaker into something that can move both the story and the platform ahead at the same time is crucial to this. And I think Vox.com is the most impressive example I've seen of this, where the tech folks are there, right there with the story making, and the story makers are there, working with an engineer to get the tools better. And if you go, we posted the video up on this event that we had at ONADC, and it's a great example of their folks hybridizing that and making hacker journalists, the standard person in the newsroom out there.
So we all basically need to have an engineer buddy with us at all times, is what you're saying.
That's their philosophy, right? That there is no real distinction between a hacker, toolmaker, and a journalist, even though the skill set of the folks at Vox are different. They want the mindset to be the same, that the tools should not hinder your storytelling, and if you have a problem with it, then grab an engineer, sit them down next to you, and see if you can make music together.
Yeah, well, maybe the answer is to have the billionaires just fund your operation like Vox rather than put them in charge. So thanks, everyone, for the great discussion. I want to thank our guests, Alex Leo from Yahoo, Andrew Lee at American University, David Folkenflik at NPR, Dylan Byers at Politico, Jefferson Yen, our producer. We want to thank our sponsor, NextSpace and NextKids. You can learn more about their program at nextspace.us/nextkids. Hope you all have a great weekend, and we'll catch you next week on the Mediatwits. You can follow us at MediaShift at pbs.org/MediaShift. Take care, everyone. Thanks.